Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media.
The woodsman was splitting wood when he noticed it. A huge grizzly bear was walking directly toward his remote cabin. The beast was massive and had to weigh at least 800 pounds. The bear's appearance was not worrisome until it didn't veer off into the brush, as most bears did. He wasn't alarmed until the bear broke into a gallop about 40 yards away. The bear's head was high, its ears up, and its eyes focused on the woodsman, who had stopped splitting wood mid-swing. Now realizing the massive grizzly was hell-bent on attacking him, the woodsman lifted his axe above his head and readied for the bear's approach. Once the bear was in range, the woodsman swung the axe with all of his might. The blade struck the bear in the middle of the skull, but glanced off due to the bear's thick hide and fur. The bear rushed past the man after the blow with the axe. It shook its head and staggered for a few seconds before turning to face the man once again. As the bear closed in on him, the woodsman could see the enormous gash torn in the bear's head and the fiery intensity in its eyes. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. The Chitina River country of Alaska is not a place that is forgiving of mistakes. It lies in the shadow of the Wrangell Mountains, where glaciers grind slowly through the rock, where spruce forests lean under heavy snow, and where winter darkness stretches long enough to fill even a seasoned frontiersman's heart with foreboding. In November of 1943, the river valleys had reached the winter low flow. The ground stiffened by freezing each night, the daylight thinning into something brief and fragile. This was a country Harry Boyden knew intimately. He'd hauled freight through it, trapped its valleys, and lived alone among its solitude and silence. To him, isolation was not a burden, it was a companion. But isolation has a way of making otherwise manageable problems much worse. When something goes wrong, this far from help, it can have the worst of consequences. Harry Boyden was nearly 60 when the encounter occurred. Born in England in 1884, he had long since exchanged the temperate world of his youth for the harsher demands of the North. He worked as a freighter, guide, and trapper, a man shaped by hardship and rigor rather than comfort and convenience. He was not reckless. He was experienced, deliberate, and accustomed to solving problems alone. The day before the attack was his birthday. On November 14, 1943, Boyden was traveling in the Chitina River country when he stopped near a small cabin he used before. He was unarmed. There was no rifle within reach, no revolver tucked into his belt. What he had instead were tools of survival, an axe, his wits, and the habits formed by decades of living where mistakes carried a permanent burden. By the 1940s, Alaska's interior still held one of the densest populations of brown and grizzly bears on the continent. Large old boars dominated vast territories, particularly in river corridors, where late salmon runs and moose carcasses could sustain them into early winter. November was a dangerous time. Bears were desperate to feed before denning, unpredictable, and often aggressive if surprised or challenged near a food source or shelter. Human encounters in this area were rarely documented in detail unless something extraordinary occurred. Many ended in death without witnesses. Others survived, but never recorded beyond local storytelling. Boyden's encounter stood out not only because it happened, but because it did not end when it should have. Boyden was outside the cabin when he saw the bear, later estimated by Boyden himself to weigh around 800 pounds. The animal was close, far closer than comfort allowed, and immediately aggressive. There was no time to retreat, no cover to reach. The bear charged. Boyden stood his ground long enough to swing his axe. The blade struck the bear's skull, glancing rather than biting deeply. It was enough to stagger the animal momentarily, but not enough to stop it. The bear knocked Boyden to the ground and mauled him, raking and biting, before suddenly breaking off the attack. Many bear encounters end there, if only this one did. The bear did not flee into the wilderness. It remained near the cabin. Boyden dragged himself inside, bleeding, bruised, shaken, but alive. He barred the door and waited, listening to the animal move outside. Hours passed. The bear returned repeatedly, pacing, testing the walls, brushing against the structure, as if unwilling to abandon the place, or the man inside of it. Night fell, temperatures dropped. Boyden lay injured on the cabin floor, fully aware that the bear had not gone far. At one point, the animal attempted to force its way inside. Boyden rang bells, shouted, and beat on the walls, anything to convince the bear that the cabin was not worth the effort. Still, the bear stayed. When daylight finally returned, Boyden attempted to escape. He cracked the door and stepped outside, hoping the bear had moved on during the night. Unfortunately for him, it had not. The grizzly charged again. This time the fight was closer, more desperate. Boyden used whatever he had, his axe, his fists, even his stocking cap, swinging, striking, jabbing at the bear's face. He rang bells directly in its ears. The noise, the confusion, the sheer refusal to surrender eventually drove the bear back. Boyden retreated into the cabin once more, bloodied, exhausted, and fully aware that he was still not safe. The bear returned yet again, pressing against the cabin, attempting to tear its way inside. Boyden stood at the door, axe in hand, ready for what he believed would be the final fight. This time the bear hesitated. After hours, possibly days of harassment, the animal finally withdrew. Boyden survived, barely. Later accounts suggest the bear was eventually killed by another trapper in the area, though Boyden himself did not pursue it. He lived long enough to tell the story, not as a boast, but as a statement of fact. Boyden's ordeal invites inevitable comparison to the legendary attack on Hugh Glass more than a century earlier. Both men were mauled by grizzlies. Both were left critically injured in remote wilderness. Both relied on stubborn will rather than depending on others for rescue. But there's a critical difference. Hugh Glass was attacked once and abandoned. His survival became a test of endurance after the encounter. Harry Boyden's survival depended on enduring the bear itself, again and again, while it refused to leave. Glass crawled away from death. Boyden held his ground, while death circled his cabin through the night. If Hugh Glass represents survival through escape, Boyden represents survival through defiance and resolve. Harry Boyden survived one of the most prolonged and psychologically harrowing grizzly encounters ever recorded. He lived with his injuries and carried the memory of a night where retreat was impossible and surrender would have been fatal. The bear was not immediately killed, and no wildlife management action followed at the time, consistent with the era and location. Everything about the bear's behavior suggests territorial or resource-based defensiveness, rather than predation. The animal did not attempt to consume Boyden, nor did it drag him away. Instead, it repeatedly returned, testing, challenging, and asserting dominance over a perceived intrusion. There was no known cached carcass nearby. The bear was reacting defensively to protect space, resources, or dominance in a landscape where it had never needed to yield. It had no cubs to defend, eliminating that as a potential contributing factor. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon link below will give you ad-free early access to episodes, photos, and notes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why do you think the bear remained instead of retreating after the initial attack? Was it exerting dominance over perceived competition? Would Boyden have survived a third full charge outside the cabin? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.